Hello, Australia! Thanks for having me come talk to your conference. I'm so excited about what you guys are going to be doing here this weekend. So I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, but I've been working in Australia for most of the past year, and for 5 years prior to that, I worked on what we call the tar sands campaign here in Canada with Ariel, Derringer, and a bunch of other kick-ass Canadian and North American organizers. I'm here to tell you a little bit about what I've learned about the world of social change in 20 plus years of trying to make it happen, and mostly failing at it. I got started as a web developer when I was 22. Just worked for charities that I wanted to help and causes that I wanted to help them tell their story and connect with people. And I started to learn over the years that a lot of the work we were doing in the NGO sector wasn't really changing the world, wasn't really having the impact that we needed. So why is that? You know, the world is actually held together by very, very strong forces. As you know, as youth, you see the world very clearly as far as how we're not getting the world that we need from the power that is actually holding things in place. But there's also some forces that are really breaking the traditional power structures of the world that you guys are, again, quite familiar with. We call them a combination of the networked society, the interconnectedness of a networked society, and then the wicked problems that we're trying to solve, like climate change, like indigenous rights, like inequality, cannot be intergenerational theft, cannot actually be dealt with through single issue organizing. So this past couple of years, I set out to find out what was actually making change work. Let's study the groups that have huge power, that bang the world into their shape, like the Minerals Council, like the corporate groups. Let's study the Keystone campaign, which I worked on in the US, the Bernie Sanders campaign. We studied, now it's about 60 campaigns around the world, and this is what we found, and that's what I want to share with you today. Basically, the campaigns that are making the most impact, besides the ones that have $40 million budgets and access to Murdoch media and can basically shape the world the way they think it should be shaped, are what we call directed networks. And it's essentially a way for smaller grassroots organizations to collaborate with other organizations and institutions to actually flex some serious power and punch our way through some progressive change that the world desperately needs. Directed networks balance central strategic leadership with considerable agency and autonomy for grassroots leaders and for partners. It's basically a marriage of old and new power and old and new campaigning styles. And I think for you guys coming up in this world, you know, you can actually bypass a lot of the bullshit NGO stuff that limits change and that leads to incremental or no change, and actually work in this new way that many, many people around the world are using to make change. There's 4 elements of what we call directed networks that we found in the research and found in our own experience working in Australia and around the world. The first is open to people power. Making sure that your campaign is really open, that others can take leadership, that the energy of the campaign is not your staff or a small group of you, but is actually magnified and amplified by tons of people. The second is people don't do that, they don't join your cause, they don't get passionately ambitious about it until you actually frame a compelling story. So storytelling really matters, grounding our work in myths and values, creating heroes and supervillains, not being afraid to pull punches about what the real stakes of this battle are, and giving people, like Bernie Sanders did in the US, something inspiring enough to get excited about, like free college tuition, or really going after corporate wealth, rather than a kind of a Hillary, boring incrementalist campaign that essentially no one really got excited about. One of the elements, the third one that I'm most excited about is cross-movement network hubs, that essentially every campaign we studied, other than a few outliers, those working alone don't actually cause change. When real power is when environmentalists align with indigenous rights, is when justice is aligned with immigration, where there's these different movements come together and we kind of triple our power and triple our fearsomeness to our opponents who very clearly and very strategically keep us separated. And that's not easy work to do, to actually work in real deep relationship with other movements. And finally, we got to run like a business, more like a business, in that we have to run with focus and discipline. We have to have real resources to bring to these fights. We actually have to be strategic and be disciplined on how we use our energy towards very specific leverage points. It doesn't take, it takes structure in order to really beat power and to really win on these things. So a couple of quick stories. The Pull Together campaign is an indigenous fundraising campaign I helped start here. We've raised over $1 million in 3 years from zero, with zero email list. All that money is going towards indigenous communities that are fighting fossil fuel projects that settlers don't want. And the open to people power is all of the money that came in through grassroots people organizing their own events or doing online fundraising. The cause was very compelling. It's connecting with indigenous rights and indigenous power with climate change and wanting to block fossil fuel projects that a lot of people don't want, that are being forced on us. We ran a tight ship. It was a serious campaign. We had real money to raise that. to raise that $1 million. It took money to raise it. We had staff, we had organizers, we had digital people. And finally, the whole campaign was very cross-movement in how it was put together. Indigenous movement with environmental, with local control. So on the Adani campaign, which I've also had the privilege of working on this year, it reflects all that as well. And the reason why you're seeing it as Australia's biggest campaign in a generation is because it is open to people power. It's got a very compelling story. It's cross-movement. We've got to work on that. You guys can help it become more cross-movement. The movement in Australia still is way too white, and there's not enough connections between real Indigenous leaders and environmental and other causes, and as well as labor that we struggle with around the world, making environment and labor come together. And finally, Adani has resources. You don't go up against the Minerals Council, the federal government, the Queensland's government, and one of the world's biggest and nastiest industries with a paperclip and a pen. You actually need resources to fight them. But what gives me hope in the world is people power. It's what bends the arc of the moral universe towards justice. It doesn't happen naturally. In fact, there's huge forces holding it away from justice. And you guys are the ones who are bending it. And in your careers and in the work you do in the world, you are going to bend that arc. We are going to win on climate change. And thank you for everything you're doing to make this world better. Take care.